The wind found her before the words did. It slid through her coat like a hand that knew exactly where she was weakest, prying at seams, stealing warmth she could no longer spare. Snow fell sideways, sharp and impatient, blurring the road into a single white ache. Elara Whitmore stood still because moving felt pointless, because the sound of the car door slamming had already told her everything she needed to know. The taillights were gone now. Red swallowed by white. Her stepmother hadn't looked back. Vivian Whitmore never did when there was nothing left to gain. She had said the drive was too dangerous, that Elara was old enough to manage, that this was for the best. The words had landed softly, practiced, as if cruelty could be gentle when spoken calmly. Then the car had rolled forward, tires crunching once, twice, and disappeared into the storm like a decision already made weeks ago. Elara breathed in through her nose and tasted metal. The cold had a flavor. It stung the back of her throat and settled there, daring her to panic. She didn't. Panic was loud, and she had learned early that loud feelings only gave people excuses to leave faster. Instead, she adjusted the thin strap of her suitcase, though the handle had already snapped. It lay half buried in snow at her feet, useless. Everything she owned was inside it, and still it felt lighter than the silence around her. Her gloves were cheap, fingers already damp. One slipped free when she bent to lift the case, vanishing instantly into the white. She noticed the bare skin at once, the way the cold bit harder there, but she didn't search for the glove. Some things were gone the moment you let go, and reaching after them only made you colder. The road stretched empty in both directions, a narrow vein cutting through endless snowdrifts. No houses. No streetlights. Just the low groan of wind and the steady hiss of falling snow. Elara turned slowly, taking it in, as if memorizing the place where she had been left behind. There was a strange clarity in it. No one to impress. No one to explain herself to. Just a body in a storm, still standing. She thought of her father then, not vividly, but in pieces. The smell of sawdust on his coat. The way he used to hum when he fixed things. How his voice softened when he said her name. He had died before teaching her how to ask for help without apologizing. Vivian had stepped into the quiet he left behind and filled it with rules instead of warmth. Be useful. Be grateful. Don't expect too much. Tonight, she had finally expected nothing, and even that had been too much. A sound cut through the wind. Low at first, almost imagined. Elara lifted her head, snow collecting in her lashes. Headlights emerged from the blur, pale and hesitant, like eyes opening in the dark. A car approached slowly, tires crunching with care, as if the driver respected how easily things could slide out of control here. She didn't wave. She didn't step into the road. She had learned not to perform desperation. The car slowed anyway, coming to a stop several feet ahead. For a moment, nothing happened. Snow tapped against the windshield. The engine hummed, steady, alive. The window rolled down. Warm air spilled out, brushing her face, and the contrast almost made her dizzy. The man behind the wheel looked at her the way people look at something unexpected but real. He was 30, maybe a little more, dark hair dusted with snow, eyes steady but tired. There was no panic in him, no urgency to fix her. Just attention. "You'll freeze out here," he said. His voice was low, even, shaped by concern rather than command. Elara opened her mouth and found nothing ready to leave it. Explanations crowded her throat, all of them heavy. She swallowed them back. The wind pushed against her spine, impatient. "I can take you somewhere warm," he continued, after a pause that felt intentional. "You don't have to tell me anything." Something in that landed deeper than kindness. It was the absence of expectation. Elara hesitated, fingers burning, pride and fear wrestling quietly inside her chest. Getting into a stranger's car was dangerous. Staying where she was felt worse. She nodded once. The movement cost her more than she expected. The door opened, and heat wrapped around her legs like an invitation. She climbed in, stiff and careful, bringing snow and silence with her. The door shut. The storm became distant, muffled, as if someone had closed a curtain on it. The man reached over and turned the heat higher, then handed her a clean pair of gloves from the console. She accepted them without meeting his eyes, sliding them on, feeling the ache in her fingers soften into something almost like relief. "I'm Julian," he said, pulling back onto the road. "Ilara," she replied, voice rough but steady. The car moved forward, cutting through the storm together, while behind them the place she had been left faded into white, and ahead, something uncertain waited to be named. The house appeared gradually, as if it had been waiting for them to arrive before deciding to exist. Its windows glowed a patient amber through the trees, light held steady against the storm. Julian turned off the road and eased the car into the driveway, tires crunching softly over packed snow. Ilara watched the light instead of him, afraid that if she looked at his face she might see expectation there, some quiet demand she wasn't ready to meet. Inside, warmth settled around her immediately, not rushing, not overwhelming, just present. The door closed behind them with a sound that felt final in a way she didn't fear. Snow melted off her coat and pooled at her feet. Julian took her suitcase without comment, even though the handle was broken, even though it was obvious how little it held. He placed it by the wall as if it belonged there. "Shoes," he said gently, gesturing. "They'll dry better by the vent." She obeyed, embarrassed by how stiff her fingers felt, how much effort it took to loosen laces. The floor beneath her socks was warm. It startled her. She hadn't realized how long it had been since warmth came from under her feet, instead of somewhere far away. A small figure appeared at the end of the hallway, hair rumpled with sleep, eyes wide but curious. He wore mismatched socks and an oversized sweater that slipped off one shoulder. He stopped when he saw her, gaze lifting slowly from her damp boots to her face. "Dad," the boy said, voice quiet but certain. Julian turned. "Hey, Milo. I didn't mean to wake you." Milo looked at Ilara again, studying the way her shoulders curved inward, the way her hands hovered near her sides as if unsure where to rest. "She's cold," he said simply. The statement wasn't a question or a judgment. It was an observation, delivered with the seriousness of someone who believed noticing things mattered. Julian nodded, as if Milo had named something important. "I'll make some tea," Julian said. "Go grab a blanket, okay?" Milo disappeared down the hallway without another word. Ilara felt something tighten in her chest at the efficiency of it, the quiet teamwork. No raised voices. No sighs of inconvenience. Just movement toward care. Julian handed her a mug moments later, steam curling upward, carrying the scent of chamomile and something faintly sweet. She wrapped both hands around it, heat seeping into her palms, into places that still hurt. She didn't drink right away. She just breathed. "Thank you," she said eventually, the words small but deliberate. "You're welcome," he replied, as if it were the most natural exchange in the world. Milo returned dragging a blanket nearly as large as he was. He stopped in front of her, hesitated, then lifted it with both hands and draped it over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her sleeve accidentally, and he pulled them back quickly, watching her face to see if he'd done something wrong. Ilara smiled, surprised by the ease of it. "That's perfect," she told him. He smiled back, relieved, then yawned, the intensity of the moment spent. Julian guided him gently toward the hallway again, murmuring something Ilara couldn't hear. Milo glanced back once before disappearing, as if memorizing her presence just in case. The house settled into a quiet rhythm. The wind pressed against the windows, but it sounded tired now, dulled by glass and distance. Ilara sat on the edge of the couch, blanket wrapped tightly around her, mug warming her fingers. She noticed details without trying. A pair of small boots by the door. A photo frame turned face down on a shelf. The faint scent of pine and clean laundry. Everything spoke of lives lived carefully, with attention. Julian sat across from her, far enough to leave space, close enough to be present. He didn't ask her where she was from, or where she was going. The absence of questions felt intentional, like a gift he trusted her to open when she was ready. "I can set up the guest room," he said after a while. "You should sleep." "Sleep." The word felt distant, almost theoretical, but comforting all the same. "I don't want to be a problem," Ilara said before she could stop herself. Julian met her eyes then, really looked at her, and something steady passed between them. You're not, he said. No emphasis. No reassurance layered with doubt. Just fact. Later, lying beneath unfamiliar sheets that smelled faintly of soap and winter air, Alara listened to the house breathe. Pipes hummed softly. Floorboards creaked once, then stilled. She stared at the ceiling, warmth pressing down on her like a careful hand. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed gently. A child's footsteps faded. For the first time since the storm began, Alara let herself imagine staying until morning, and the thought frightened her more than the cold ever had. Morning arrived quietly, the way kindness often did in this house. Pale light slipped through the curtains and rested on the walls, turning shadows into something softer, less certain of themselves. Alara woke before the alarm she didn't own, her body still tuned to leaving early, to being gone before she could be noticed. For a moment she forgot where she was, and panic fluttered in her chest. Then warmth pressed against her skin, the weight of blankets, the distant clink of dishes, and she remembered. She dressed slowly, borrowing the clothes Julian had left folded on the chair. They were simple and clean and far too large, but they smelled faintly of fabric soap and safety. When she stepped into the hallway, Milo was already awake, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a book open in his lap. He looked up at her like he'd been waiting. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she answered, surprised again by how easily her voice cooperated here. Julian stood in the kitchen, back turned, pouring coffee. He glanced over his shoulder and smiled, small and tired but real. "I hope that's okay," he said, gesturing to the clothes. "They're perfect," Alara replied, and meant more than the fabric. Breakfast unfolded without ceremony. Toast, eggs, the soft scrape of chairs. Milo talked about school, about a science project involving snow crystals, about how his teacher said winter made people honest because you couldn't hide from the cold. Julian listened with the patience of someone who had learned how fragile mornings could be. Alara watched them both, absorbing the cadence of a family that had learned how to bend without breaking. The days that followed slipped into each other like pages not meant to be separated. Snow fell again, gentler this time, coating the world in quiet instead of threat. Alara helped where she could, washing dishes, folding laundry, sweeping the entryway. No one asked her to earn her place, but she did it anyway, instinctively, like offering proof she was worth keeping. Julian worked from home, his voice low during calls, his presence steady. Milo did homework at the table, occasionally sliding a crayon toward Alara without looking at her, as if including her was already decided. Sometimes Julian caught her watching them and looked away, not wanting to turn her into an observer of something she might feel excluded from. One afternoon, the latch on the back window stuck. Julian fetched his tools and Alara followed, holding the flashlight. Their hands brushed once, accidentally, and both of them paused. Not because it meant something grand, but because it meant something careful. Julian fixed the latch. Alara held the light steady. Neither rushed. That night, after Milo fell asleep with his book still open on his chest, Alara sat at the kitchen table and spoke in a voice that surprised her with its calm. She told Julian about Vivian, about rules disguised as concern, about being praised only when she disappeared into usefulness. She didn't accuse. She didn't cry. She just placed the truth between them, and waited to see if it would be too heavy. Julian listened without interrupting, fingers wrapped around his mug. When she finished, he nodded once. "I understand," he said. Not because their stories matched, but because he knew what it meant to live around absence. He told her about his wife then, about winter mornings and hospital rooms, and learning how to braid Milo's hair without making it hurt. He spoke about fear, not of being alone, but of failing the one person who depended on him most. Alara recognized the shape of that fear. It was the same one that kept her from unpacking her suitcase. The phone rang the next day while Julian was out shoveling. Alara answered before thinking. Vivian's voice slid through the line, sharp and familiar. She accused Alara of overreacting, of embarrassing the family, of needing to grow up. She reminded her of favors given and debts owed. Alara stood very still as the words landed, each one reopening something she had just begun to close. Julian came inside to find Alara standing by the window, phone still in her hand, face unreadable. He didn't hear the voice on the other end, only the silence after. He assumed the worst because it was easier than hoping. He gave her space, mistaking restraint for distance, distance for intention. That evening, the house felt different. Not colder, exactly, but cautious. Julian spoke less. Alara withdrew, shame curling tight around her ribs. Milo noticed first. He asked if Alara would still read with him before bed. She said yes too quickly, afraid of the alternative. Later, alone in the guest room, Alara found something folded neatly on the dresser. Her missing glove. Clean and dry. Julian must have found it in the car, kept it without asking, saved it without needing credit. She sat on the bed and held it like proof that she had been seen even when she wasn't trying. Snow began to fall again outside, light and patient. Alara stood at the doorway, glove in hand, unsure whether she was brave enough to stay somewhere that didn't ask her to leave, while Julian watched from the kitchen, wondering when warmth had started to feel like something he might lose. Snow fell the way it always had, quietly, without asking permission. It gathered on the porch rail, on the bare branches beyond the window, on the place where Alara now stood with the door open, and the cold pressing gently against her face. It felt different than it had that first night. Less sharp. Less personal. As if it had learned it could no longer claim her so easily. Behind her, the house breathed. A kettle clicked softly in the kitchen. Floorboards shifted as someone moved, careful not to rush. Alara held the dry glove in one hand and the other still bare, feeling the contrast, remembering how it had burned before, how the numbness had crept in without warning. She could step outside now if she chose. She could walk back into the white and let it decide things for her again. The thought no longer felt inevitable. It felt like a choice. Julian stopped a few steps away, close enough that his presence filled the space without crowding it. He didn't ask where she was going. He didn't tell her to stay. He waited, which somehow felt harder and kinder than either. Alara turned toward him slowly, meeting his eyes without apology. There was fear there, but it wasn't loud. It was the kind that stayed quiet, so it wouldn't scare anyone away. "I wasn't planning to leave without saying anything," she said. The words were steady, even though her chest tightened around them. "But I don't know how to stay in places that feel like this." Julian nodded, absorbing it. "I don't know how to ask people to stay," he replied, voice low. "I got used to assuming they'd go when they needed to." The honesty settled between them, not heavy, not sharp. Just real. Alara slid the second glove on, completing the pair, and the small, ordinary act felt ceremonial in a way she hadn't expected. Milo appeared in the hallway then, rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up in every direction. He took in the scene with quick intuition, walked over, and held out a folded piece of paper. "I made this," he said to Alara. It was a drawing of the house, smoke rising from the chimney, 3 figures inside colored unevenly but together. Alara felt something loosen in her chest that she hadn't realized was clenched. "Thank you," she whispered. Morning unfolded without announcement. Curtains were drawn back. Light spilled across the table, turning steam into gold. Julian cracked eggs with practiced care. Milo hummed tunelessly while setting plates. Alara moved among them, not hovering, not hiding, just present. She reached for a mug and found it already warm. Julian had filled it without comment. They ate slowly. Conversation came in pieces, gentle and unforced. Milo laughed at something trivial. Alara smiled without checking herself. Julian watched both of them, a quiet relief settling into his shoulders. Outside, snow continued its patient work, blanketing the world in something clean and forgiving. Later, Alara stood at the window again, this time with the door closed, the glass cool beneath her fingertips. The road beyond was barely visible now, softened by white. It no longer looked like an escape route. It looked like a reminder of where she had been, and how far she had come without moving very far at all. Julian joined her, leaving space between them that felt intentional, respectful. "You can stay," he said, not as an offer that required an answer, but as a truth he was willing to live with either way. "As long as it feels right." Alara breathed in, steadying herself, and let the warmth settle where the cold once lived. She nodded once, the the same way she had in the storm, but this time the movement felt lighter. Behind them, Milo's laughter echoed down the hallway, bright and unguarded, and for the first time, Elara believed the cold might never reach her again.